Hello everyone, Mason here. How are you doing? Today it's time for a book review. Something I'm realising about myself is that I'm far more critical than I used to think I was. I actually quite liked most of the books I read in January, but in my wrap up I made it sound like I really didn't. I think I'm guilty of pointing out the things that I didn't like about a book more than the things that I did like. The problem is, when you read as much as we do on Booktube, and I read a relatively small amount compared to other channels, we come across a lot of books that are just average. Unfortunately, this is a channel where, amongst other silly bollocks, I review books, and telling you that they're average isn't very entertaining, is it? It's okay though, because today I'm going to prove to you that I do like reading books, and sometimes I do have good things to say. Every now and again, you stumble across something that's actually special, that really stands out, and I did that this month when I picked up Beside Myself by Anne Morgan. Here's the premise. Helen and Ellie are identical twins. They're just 6 years old. One day they decide that they're going to switch places, as a joke, a harmless, childish prank, but it all goes wrong. Helen is confident. Out of the two twins, she's the one that's in charge. Ellie is much more shy and reserved. Unfortunately, she's also the least favourite twin. When the switch works so well that it even tricks their own mother, who isn't a very nice person by the way, Ellie realises how it feels to be treated like Helen, and so when the time comes to switch back, she refuses. Helen is stuck as Ellie, and that's the snowball that causes an avalanche. I've seen a lot of people define Beside Myself as a psychological thriller, and personally I think that's unfair at best and inaccurate at worst. Certain people are going to come away from this not having liked it due to it not meeting their expectations because they've been sold on something that it just isn't. If you go into Beside Myself expecting an ultra fast paced white knuckle page turner, you're not going to get it because that's not what it is. I would call it more of a character study. There are so many themes that Anne Morgan explores, and identity is the most prominent. She takes a look at how society traps us, how we're given a role from an early age, defined by our family, our teachers, and even our friends as a certain type of person. Maybe you're funny, clever, hard-working, popular, destined for great things. But maybe you're not. Maybe you're a hopeless delinquent, a loner, a loser. And those roles can become self-fulfilling prophecies, prisons that we can never escape from. By the time the story begins, this has already happened to Helen and Ellie. They're just 6 years old, and yet they've already been given roles that they're trapped within. At least, Ellie's trapped. Helen is seen as confident and capable. She has praise heaped upon her, given responsibility, told that she is brilliant. Meanwhile, Ellie is seen as shy, reserved. She's chastised for not being more like her sister. They treat her as if she's socially awkward and act as if this is a bad thing, as if it's her fault. They isolate her from the rest of the class by treating her as if she has learning difficulties that it turns out she just doesn't have. She's trapped in what Helen refers to as her Ellie-ness. The thing is, this isn't Ellie's story. She's actually not much of a character in Beside Myself, because the truth is, when the switch happens, she's freed from her role. As soon as everybody thinks that she's Helen, they treat her like Helen, and she thrives. The story is actually about Helen, and now we're getting into the stuff that I absolutely love. What happens when your identity doesn't match the role society is trying to give you? When you know that you're one person, but society is trying to treat you as somebody else? Well, for Helen, it's a recipe for disaster. We get two timelines told through alternating chapters. They focus on Helen and Smudge. They're the same person. Smudge is Helen as an adult, down on her luck, severely mentally ill and not in a good place whatsoever. So we know where she's heading, but we also follow Helen from the moment the switch happens, through her childhood and her adolescence, piece by piece learning how she becomes Smudge. I love that Anne Morgan had me wrapped around her little finger. I felt exactly what she wanted me to feel. At the beginning of the story, I felt like Helen was getting what she deserved because she's actually quite cruel to Ellie. But the more you get to know her, the more you get to understand why she acts that way. After all, she's just a child and she's only acting the way that she's been taught to act. I'll admit, I judged her unfairly. The author does such a good job of taking her from being what I can only describe as a bully to a character that I genuinely cared about. I felt every high and every low that she went through, and I have to admit there are more lows than highs. Through the events that take place with Helen at their centre, we get to see how one bad decision can shape your entire life, trap you in a downward spiral, set you on a path that you can't deviate from no matter how hard you try. When we, as a society, slap a label on somebody, treat them as an outsider, and constantly berate them with our negative opinions of them, they start to believe those opinions, and they start to fulfill the role we are providing for them. How can this not create a vicious cycle? The more they act out, the more they misbehave, the more we chastise them, the more we punish them. And it goes on and on until the bitter end. This happens to Helen. She becomes a troubled, angry child who puts herself in dangerous situations and turns into a delinquent teenager who's heavily into the 90s counterculture and has nobody. She hates Ellie for stealing her life. She hates the rest of the world for not believing her when she tells the truth and for not recognising her Helenness. The angrier she gets, the more she acts out. The more her family, teachers, and even her former friends treat her like somebody to be feared or despised. And so she fulfills that role. As time goes by, Helen's life just spirals out of control. She has no positive influences, nobody that treats her with any kind of love or respect, and eventually she ends up in a hole that's just so deep she can't get back out of it. My very favourite thing about Beside Myself is the way that Anne Morgan utilises language to not just tell the story, but demonstrate character development. The chapters that follow Helen's childhood are narrated in first person, and they are so childlike. The word choices, the sentence structure, the phrases that Helen uses that she has quite clearly picked up from grown-ups like her mum. On multiple occasions, she refers to something her father does as the unfortunate decision, and a room full of his belongings as the pointless creations. These aren't phrases that she's come up with herself, she's echoing the words of her mother. What could possibly be more childlike than a 6-year-old trying to sound more grown up by emulating the adults in her life? As time goes by, Helen loses her sense of self piece by piece. Eventually, she's not sure who she is, whether the switch even happened. Is she Helen or Ellie? Can she even trust her own memories? It's clear from a very early age that this is having a huge effect on her mental health. And then just as she's reaching adolescence, she suffers a traumatic event that leads to a total snap. She dissociates from herself. At that point, the narrative voice switches from first person to second person, and I thought that was an absolutely fantastic linguistic choice that absolutely hammered home the psychological effect that all of this has had on Helen. Now that I think about it, it actually goes even deeper than that, because Smudge's chapters are narrated in third person, which could be symbolic of the fact that she feels even more removed from herself. I personally think that Beside Myself is absolutely brilliant. It's an interesting, unique premise, and it's executed almost perfectly. I'll be honest, I can't think of a single thing I didn't like about it. Yes, it's quite long, and the pacing can feel slow at times, but whilst it's slow, it's never boring. It's full of poignant observations, social commentary, fantastic character development, and a deep exploration of various themes, some of which I can't even talk about because they'd be massive spoilers. There are some heavy topics, including drug and alcohol abuse, references to self-harm, sexual assault, and, of course, mental illness. What I will say is, I never felt like any of them were handled insensitively, and as far as the mental illness goes, it's not a gimmick. It's not just there to make Helen feel crazy. There are various contextual reasons why it makes sense for Helen to have these mental health issues, and although I can't say whether it's a realistic depiction because I'm not a psychologist, I will say that it felt believable and consistent to me. I think it's amazing that this is Anne Morgan's debut novel. If I could ever write something this good, I'd be well pleased, to say the least. It's a compelling story with lots of meat on the bone and a protagonist that she manages to make you really care about. The one thing that I hated about it was the mother, and to be honest, you're kinda supposed to, so even that's a job well done. Beside Myself is rated R for recommended. My question for today is this: if you had to travel the world with one fictional character, who would it be, and why? If you've enjoyed this video, the like and subscribe buttons are just sitting there, waiting to be pressed. Now press them, or I'll steal every pair of shoes you own and throw them in a wood chipper. If you want to get in touch to say hi and have a chat, you know where the comment section is, and the link to my Twitter can be found in the description. Thanks ever so much for spending time with me today, guys. Until next time, take care. For now, I'm off, and you should have a good one.